Good morning and welcome to the home of Unitarian Universalism in Central Washington. I'm Pat Whitfield and I serve on the worship team, and I am a greeter as well as a member of the choir. I am a celebrant today for today's service, and today's speaker is Steve Clem. If you're a visitor this morning, we are so glad you're here. This morning we welcome every person of goodwill, just as you are, however you get around, whomever you love, whatever body you inhabit, whatever your age, you are welcome here. We invite you to join us for a social hour after the service, both in person and on Zoom. For the folks on Zoom, you can find our order of service in the chat. Now, please take a moment, those of you who are here, and greet your neighbor. We gather on the homeland of the Pisquosa, where they lived for generations upon generations as stewards of this land. Since 1865, the United States government has failed to abide by agreements the Pisquosa made in good faith. The Pisquosa people still live here. They continue their traditions. They seek to have all the rights returned to them, retained by them and agreed upon by the government, recognized and restored. Okay. Our opening words today are a prayer written by the Unitarian Universalist Reverend Jacob Trapp. Wisdom, be more precious than possessions without end. Truth, be more sacred than the pleasing of a friend. Courage, be our strength to gain the distant goal. Beauty, send cleansing wonders through the soul. We now kindle a sacred flame. If you're joining by video, please light your own chalice as well. We join Unitarians and Unitarian Universalists all over the world in lighting our chalices this morning. Light of truth, and seek to share.
Today's wisdom readings from the Jewish Bible, Proverbs 3:13, 3:16. Blessed is the one who finds wisdom, and the one who gets understanding. For the gain from her is better than gain from silver, and her profit better than gold. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire can compare to her. From Sherry Mitchell's book, Sacred Instructions, Indigenous Wisdom. We experience a deep sense of comfort when we connect with those who are aligned with the truth of our present moment. All of our beliefs are affirmed by these connections. When this happens, it can feel like we've come home. However, if we're not careful, we can become seduced by that sense of comfort, and it will lull us to sleep. The spiritual path is continuous. It is not a safe haven to rest in. If we settle down in any one place, then we stop growing. And from Lao Tzu, as is written in the Tao Te Ching. In harmony with the Tao, the sky is clear and spacious. The earth is solid and full. All creatures flourish together, content with the way they are, endlessly repeating themselves, endlessly renewing themselves. And to close, from J.R.R. Tolkien and Frodo Baggins. Sam, I tried to save the Shire, and it has been saved, but not for me. It must often be so, Sam. When things are in danger, someone has to give them up, lose them, so that others may keep them. But you are my heir. All that I had and might have had, I leave to you. You will be the mayor, of course, as long as you want to be, and the most famous gardener in history. And you will read things out of the Red Book and keep alive the memory of the age that is gone, so that people will remember the great danger. And so they will love their beloved land all the more, and that will keep you busy and as happy as anyone can be, as long as your part in the story goes on. Well, good morning, and welcome to Reflections by an Old White Guy. Today we're going to be exploring some of my thoughts regarding intergenerational relationships and about my racism. My generation has lived through probably the most rapid period of change in history. I was born in 1952. Our first television set was round, about that big, black and white, inside a wood cabinet, had rabbit ears, right? And it had a dial you could select channels 2 through 13, except that we only had 3 working stations in San Francisco at the time. The Mickey Mouse Club was my favorite show, and I had this incredible crush on Annette Funicello. Most of the TV programming was Westerns, where the Indians were always savages, and the cowboys and U.S. Army were always the noble protectors. And we spent most of our days playing outside. Street football, street baseball, and we played cowboys and Indians. We had a rotary phone that hung on the wall in the kitchen, and it was a party line shared with 3 other families. And sometimes we'd listen in to see what they were talking about, and until we heard the words that said, "Stevie Clem, get off the phone. I'm coming over to talk to your mother right now." Click. That happened more regularly than I wanted to admit, because they were always talking about great stuff. My school was white, and we were taught at school and in the media that America was the best country on earth, could do nothing wrong, and that America protected the world from communism and socialism. I believe that our president was the greatest, smartest person in the world. I was taught and believed that everyone in America could be successful through determination and hard work, and anyone in America could be president. Life changed in the 60s. We got a private telephone line, and color televisions were available. Astronaut John Glenn circled the globe in a little capsule. Amazing. Yet, over the next 8 years, events transpired that shattered my beliefs about America. This is a chronology for me. The entire country began watching nightly TV news showing people demonstrating and protesting against mistreatment of blacks and demanding their equal rights. We'd never had that access before. Our president was assassinated. His killer was then assassinated, all on camera. We watched television in horror. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution was adopted, and we were at war in Vietnam. My father died. There were kids of color at my new school. The Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act were passed with tremendous pushback, and people rioted for days in Los Angeles. Protests against the Vietnam War became front-page news. The draft was on the minds of all 18 and 19-year-old boys. Muhammad Ali was sent to prison for refusing to serve. Martin Luther King began speaking out against the war. The summer of love arrived in the Haight-Ashbury, and hippies were in the spotlight, as was free love. Martin Luther King was assassinated. The war continued. Robert Kennedy was assassinated. Protests against racial discrimination continued. My cousin joined the Marines and died 10 days after arriving in Vietnam. Woodstock took place at Yeager's Farm, and every night the television news reported the day's casualty numbers for the war and added them to the totals. The chant was, "Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today?" Richard Nixon was elected president, and the National Guard shot at unarmed students protesting at Kent State, killing 4. The anti-war protests and demands for equal rights continued to be in the nightly news, and Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon. That all happened in 8 years. A little over a decade later, technology began to drive change at a faster and faster pace with hardware, software, internet, storage, desktop computers and printers in our offices and homes, typewriters replaced, landlines replaced, portable computers we could carry everywhere with us, cable television and streaming of video providing hundreds of channels and thousands of viewing choices, smartwatches, access to millions of internet websites, phones with more processing power than the computers that were used and enabled people to walk on the moon. We can get information, entertainment, anything we want immediately. We buy merchandise not downtown, not from the street around the corner, but from stores that are hundreds or thousands of miles away, and we get it delivered to our doorstep within a day or two. And we now have artificial intelligence available to the masses, even threatening to replace human creativity. Now, contrary to media stereotypes, older people have adapted to and embraced change, including technology. However, I want to submit that the last and perhaps the greatest change facing elders and many older people is the most difficult, and it is managing transition to the next generations. The transfer of their wisdom, their experience, and their power, and making it more difficult is the challenge of getting those who follow to participate in these transitions. White privilege. I see some shoulders going like this. I recall my first reaction. I've earned everything I've accomplished. I've worked hard. And actually, I realized very quickly, I worked no harder and probably less hard than most people. Certainly not physical labor. And I only worked one job to support myself and my family. But, my mind was working, and I could do another pushback. And this one was, I've overcome challenges and I never received any special treatment. Well, my father died when I was a child. I was physically and emotionally abused by an alcoholic stepfather. Money was tight. My mother was emotionally distant. I worked packing fruit as a teenager. I worked in college. I worked in law school. I opened up a practice at 25 to try to do it all on my own. All on my own. Yeah, stop. Clearly, my self-identity was struggling in a sea of what? White guilt, defensiveness. This is what James Baldwin wrote almost 60 years ago in his essay, White Guilt. This is the place in which it seems to me most white Americans find themselves, impaled. They are dimly or vividly aware that the history they have fed themselves is mainly a lie, but they do not know how to release themselves from it, and they suffer enormously from the resulting personal incoherence. This incoherence is heard nowhere more plainly than those stammering, terrified dialogues which white Americans sometimes entertain. The nature of the stammering can be reduced to this: don't blame me. I wasn't there. I didn't do it. Not much at all has changed in 60 years. But today we call my reactions to my white privilege, White Fragility, which is the title and subject of a book by Robin DiAngelo, a book that all of us, I think, have heard of, many of us have read, many of us enjoyed, but has been criticized by both Black and white writers and scholars as being simplistic, as not allowing room for white people to have a positive image about themselves, and providing no pathways to anti-racism. Well, I choose not to engage in a debate today about that, but I do want to quote Tim Wise, who wrote the book Dispatches from the Race War. He said, we need less guilt and shame and more indignation. Indignation at a society that promised us liberty and justice for all as a national birthright, and yet defaulted on that promise from day one, thereby diminishing the lives we all could have had by marginalizing some and elevating others. So white privilege is really how, under our political and economic systems, people of color will never be allowed to catch up, because we will always have the advantage as white people. And yes, our systems now provide equal opportunity as a matter of law, and therefore the American dream is possible for all people, regardless of race. But I don't believe that to be true. And perhaps you do. So, let's play Monopoly. Everybody's played this game, right? Monopoly. Great game. I used to love Monopoly when I was much younger, and I played often. You know, those marathon sessions, laughing, cries of protest, finger pointing, the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat. This one's a little different, because our players are either black or they're white. Money is handed out, and the black players receive about 1/12 of the money of all the white players. And by the way, that's the current difference, 1/12, in the intergenerational transfer of wealth between white people and people of color. Now, okay, all the white people get to roll first, and they get to keep rolling until they have all gone around the game board at least twice. And the properties are purchased, houses and hotels are added, and railroads and utilities get purchased. The get out of jail free cards are taken, and they're kept safe. And all the bad chance and community chess cards are placed in, a special pile that only the black players draw from. And then, they slip in a few extra go to jail cards in that pile. But the black players can't legally, under the rules, use a get out of jail free card, even if they could find one. They must roll doubles, not once, but they have to roll doubles twice if they want to get out immediately. Or, you can always post bail. Remember how we used to do that? Pay $50 in Monopoly and you get out of jail free. But the black people have to pay $50 or 25% of everything they own, whichever is greater. And every time a black player passes go, he or she gets their money like everyone else, but they have to give half of the money to one of the white players. So after 3 more times around the board, now that white players and black players are there, and all the black players have had that there 3 times, we get to change the rules, and now everybody plays by the same rules. The rules that are supposed to be part of the game, but, well, there's one exception. The rules about getting out of jail for black players, that one doesn't change, even though the rules may say it does. So what I'm describing to you is a pretty simple description about how white privilege came to be. and how it still operates. So how likely is it that the white players stay in the game long after all the black players are bankrupt, have no money, can't do anything anymore? And how likely is it for a black player, no matter how intelligent, shrewd, or hardworking, to actually win this different game of Monopoly? So I have white privilege. I've had my moments of white fragility, but does that make me a racist? I don't know. That's been a struggle. And I've decided, don't shoot the messenger. I've decided it doesn't matter. It's like, what? What do you mean it doesn't matter? And that's been my pushback on the inside. It doesn't matter. And I'm going to tell you, it doesn't. What matters is that I'm anti-racist in my actions. I'll say it again. What matters is that I am anti-racist in my actions. So Tim Wise, who wrote the book Dispatches from the Race War, says, when whites are standing with black people, they signal that racism is a black problem, but one that whites are willing to help them with anyhow. If whites saw racial inequality and injustice as evils that damage the entire society, they would think of this matter differently and more productively. They would be standing not simply to save others, but also for their own benefit. Those white anti-racists in history who made meaningful contributions to the struggle against enslavement and segregation did not debate whether to call themselves allies or co-conspirators or accomplices or whatever the hell someone thinks is a better, less problematic term. They just did the work because they understood their lives, or at least their souls, depended on it. And because labels are nouns, we have plenty of nouns. What we lack are verbs. And this is the final segment of the sermon, where I return to the title, Reflections by an Old White Guy. Because I've been called an old white guy more than once, sometimes preceded by the word just, as in just an old white guy. And I'll concede that being in one's 70s constitutes old. I'm definitely white. Well, I'm technically white, non-Hispanic, according to demographic criteria. And I'm male, so I guess I'm a guy. And in today's mode of self-identification, my pronouns are he, him, his, and I am cisgender, which means my gender identity corresponds to the gender assigned to me at birth. A Google search of the phrase old white guy resulted in over 1.5 million hits in 0.34 seconds. That technology stuff, wow. Its use pervades our political and social commentary. It has been used by members of this congregation to describe other members of this congregation. It has been used to describe our new minister, Reverend Perchik. The label old white guy has come to be shorthand for a man or group of men who are almost, but not all, white. Older, some elderly, and generally portrayed as angry, spewing vitriol, and unreasonably rigid in their beliefs. Men who negatively impact our society, our politics, and our economic system through their use of their power. Power obtained through their privilege, political position, and connections and socioeconomic status. Well, I'm going to submit to you, I don't believe being old, being white, or being a man is the issue. I don't believe that having power is the issue. I believe the issue is wielding power and wielding it in a way to restore a prior status quo while further disenfranchising, marginalizing, and causing harm to people with less power. That's the issue. And people do this based upon their fear of losing power, of losing status, and distrust, all driven by an attitude of scarcity. And correspondingly, they generate fear in others and mutual distrust. The result is our divisiveness. So I'm angry about this. I'm angry about what people are doing, and you may be angry too. But let me suggest that we abandon using that phrase, old white guy, old white men. And for the matter old, name the race, name the gender. Here are a few reasons. One, it is in almost every context intended as an insult. And aren't we beyond hurling words, humorous or invective? As Chris Rader urged us last week, let's try a little kindness. Two, we don't need this shorthand. When we can actually describe the objectionable behavior, when we can actually describe the harms that are being caused, and when we can focus on what can be changed, the attitudes, the behavior, rather than the immutable, the age, race, gender. And by abandoning this phrase, we are furthering our UU principles. The inherent worth and dignity of every person, seeking justice, equity, and compassion, and accepting one another. And fourth, and most importantly, the older men and women in our culture have a unique breadth of wisdom and experience that is valuable, a value we can lose, and a value that should be shared. Now, not necessarily followed without question, that's different, but at least acknowledged and considered and added to the wealth of knowledge and experience we have as the human race. They are our elders, and that's a special word. Our culture's treatment of elders stands in stark contrast to the manner elders are honored, respected, and even learned from in Native American, Alaskan Native, Asian, African, and Latino cultures. And I suggest our generations need to be connected. They need to be reconnected. That there be a deepening and strengthening of relationships. And that elders, and even those who are just merely older, intentionally create a pathway, inviting, stepping aside, making room to allow for those who follow. It's a pathway lined with wisdom and experience, providing guidance and the safety for those who follow to try, to fail, to keep trying, and to persevere. And offering an invitation to those who follow. That's the other thing. Elders need to reach out, say, follow me. And as part of that invitation, an invitation to use those talents, energy, and courage of those who follow, and to help them take on leadership roles. And finally, that this next generation or generations embrace the opportunities. So, whether you are elders, whether you are older, whether you are those who are following. What I hope for is a transition of humanity from elders to the next generations. And it's a sacred transfer of wisdom and experience and knowledge, and most importantly, a sacred transfer of power. And may it be so. We can stand or we can be seated, but we're at our benediction. As we leave the sanctuary, may in our hearts and minds and souls be inspired by the words of Reverend Barbara Peskin. Because of those who came before us, we are who we are. May we now go, remembering to create a path for all those who follow, to share our wisdom with grace, to encourage their dreams, to provide a safe space for learning, and to celebrate their failures as much as their successes. And please join me in our traditional chalice extinguishing words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of the community, or the fire of the equipment. Those we carry in our hearts until we are together again.